Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 9 of our discussion of Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men. Just a reminder, please, not to distribute any of these materials beyond this course. Before we get going, I'm going to ask you to please go to the link in your course outline. It'll take you to Criterion On Demand and watch 52-55 to an hour and 5 minutes in the film. At this point, the film and the novel diverge somewhat, and it's important that we contrast the two of them. We're going to see in the novel how Moss's compassion is going to cause him a little bit of problem. Moss has escaped initially, and he's hiding out now in Eagle Pass in a rented hotel room. And it's quite different from the film. So what's going on is that Shiger is tracking Moss to Eagle Pass. Shiger, of course, knows that there's a transmitter with the money, and Moss is confused at this point. He can't understand how he's being tracked by the cartels, and he wakes up. He can't sleep. He's restless. And in the film, he discovers the transmitter, and by that point, Shiger has found his door, and Moss simply blasts away at the door and escapes. In the novel, however, Moss is in the room, and he's aware that something is going on, and Shiger sneaks into the room while Moss hides, and there's a small sort of confrontation. So what I'm going to do is ask you to go to pages 110 to 113 in the novel, and I'm just going to compress what's happening here. The phone never rang. Something woke him. Now remember, Moss is a veteran. He's a survivor type. He's probably developed that intuition when something's off. He stood at the door listening. He went to the far side of the bed and dropped down. You'll notice he's smart enough not to peek out into the hallway. And he waited, and 2 columns of dark intersected the bar of light beneath the door and stood there. So Shiger has arrived, and Moss is hiding behind the bed. And Shiger enters the room, and Moss is, of course, very tense. He said, "Don't turn around," he said. "You turn around and I'll blow you to hell. Drop the gun, do it now." A shotgun clattered to the floor. Moss pulled himself up. The whole room was pulsing slowly. So, in other words, Moss doesn't know what to do. It's a very stressful situation. There was an odd smell in the room, like some foreign cologne. Again, Shiger is utterly foreign, like even his smell is foreign. He's meant to be a mystery, an enigma. We're not meant to know where Shiger is from. The man didn't even look at him. He seemed oddly untroubled, as if this were part of his day, beyond Moss's experience. The man didn't even seem to notice. His thoughts seemed elsewhere. "Right there," Moss said. "Don't you take another step." And then Moss doubled down the stairwell. He didn't know where he was going. He hadn't thought that far ahead. So in this case, Moss is utterly confused by the reaction of this man who was snuck into his room. It seems that Shiger, this is a great example of Shiger, as the idiom goes, walking the walk. In other words, Shiger does seem oddly untroubled. For Shiger's predeterministic view of the universe, he believes that people make choices that sometimes place them in dangerous situations, but that's their problem because they've made a system of choices that have led him to this point. Well, now Shiger is in front of someone's gun. And you'll notice that he doesn't panic or lose his cool or lose his predeterministic philosophy. For him, this is just the result of all the choices he's made in his life. And if he dies now, it's his fault. So he's oddly untroubled. He doesn't even bother to look at Moss. And the novel says this is beyond Moss's experience because most people, when in this kind of situation, will try and talk their way out of it, or they panic or break down. Shiger does none of those things. He's very non-human in his response for Moss. And then Moss runs out, and he hasn't thought that far ahead. Now, this is a problem for Moss because, once again, unlike the movie, Moss is confronted by Shiger, and he allows Shiger to live, and he makes a moral choice not to kill another person. This is an act of free will, which ultimately ends up in his death. It's diametrically opposed to Shiger's deterministic viewpoint. When you see on the screen here, the man didn't even look at him. He seemed oddly untroubled, as if this were part of his day. This is Shiger enacting his philosophy of determinism. He's accepted that he made the decisions that somehow put him in front of Moss's gun. It says here, the man didn't even seem to notice. His thoughts seemed elsewhere. He's beyond Moss's experience. In the film, it's very different. Moss just blasts away at whoever's behind the door. It's simply a game of cat and mouse. Now, it's not. Shiger is, as the novel says, beyond Moss's experience. And the problem is people like Moss and Wells, they underestimate the skill and determination of Shiger. At one point in the film, Carson Wells says casually, "He's a psychopathic killer, but so what? There's plenty of them around." This is a very reductionist statement about Shiger. You'll notice that Wells himself is eventually killed by Shiger. He doesn't take Shiger seriously enough. He knows that Shiger's a serious man, but Wells doesn't seem to know really what he's up against. Moss, of course, ends up dead as well, even though he doesn't know anything about Shiger. The only person who's wise enough to back off from this man, to back off from this philosophy, is Bell. And Bell is older. He's made some mistakes in his life, and he's therefore a little wiser. And he's the only one who can see that he's completely outmatched, and that the only way to compete with Shiger is to start to bend the law. And that's not what Bell stands for. Bell has spent his entire adult life trying to make up for his survivor's guilt of World War II. He's tried to stand for justice and truth and all the good things that we count on to make a civilization work. And he realizes that the only way to compete with this new type of criminal like Shiger is to break the law like Shiger. And so Bell wants to save his own soul. Right at the beginning of the novel, he says, you have to put your soul at hazard. Well, Bell will not break the law. He will not stray from his moral compass any more than Shiger will stray from his moral compass. The problem for Bell, therefore, is he has to retire because he can't compete. He cannot stop people like Shiger unless he does some questionably moral things. So if you look at this as a commentary on American culture in general, it's a disturbing point when Bell retires and draws away from trying to pursue killers like Shiger. So Moss does escape Shiger at Eagle Pass, and he crosses the border into Mexico. And just on a side note, Shiger, meanwhile, goes back to Matacumbe and kills the representative there who hired Carson Wells. In the film, Shiger says, you use the one right tool to get the job done. And he views himself as the one right tool for tracking down Moss and the money. And anybody who's going to get in the way of his job, now that he's been hired, will be eliminated, even if the person works for Matacumbe. like this manager. And it's quite interesting in the novel, he talks about why he didn't shoot out the window of the office, because he knew that glass would rain down on the people on the sidewalk. And for Chigurh, those people haven't done anything to put themselves in his path. They don't deserve to be hurt or to be involved in any of this. And so he didn't want to blow out the window and cut anybody up who hadn't made a series of decisions in their life that placed him directly in front of Chigurh. So once again, Chigurh is demonstrating his philosophy of how things work in the universe, and it's quite disturbing. And then we go forward to page 123 and 124, and this is one of Sheriff Bell's insightful commentaries. Bell is speaking of how his family came out west as settlers, and he's talking about how truth gets buried behind stories and twists and turns. He says, I think when the lies are all told and forgot, the truth will be there yet. Don't move about from place to place, and it don't change much from time to time. You can't corrupt it any more than you can salt. Well, this is a really great view of reality. It would be very nice if this was true. The question is that still true? Are there any universal truths that are held across cultures and peoples anymore? Who's evil? Who's good? In this age of fragmentation, this age of so-called fake news, of ongoing incessant media, where you get mixed messages right next to each other online about the truth, that's when societies begin to break down, when they can't agree on what's right and what's wrong. This is not some sort of philosophical argument that you'd have on a university campus somewhere. This is just historically the way that empires and cultures break down, is when they no longer know what's true and what's not true, and they can no longer agree on what's right morally and what's wrong morally. And then Bell references the Bible and likens the truth to a rock. He comes obviously from a Christian background, and he's looking for something stable to believe in, because his world seems to be fragmenting and going crazy, and he no longer feels like he's a part of it. He no longer feels like he can do his job properly. He cannot compete with this new brand of criminal, this living prophet of doom like Chigurh. As he says at the beginning, he'd have to put his soul at hazard. In other words, he would have to play by the same rules as them. It's very disturbing. Him as a representative of a justice system that he believes once stood for what's right and what's wrong, being unable to compete with organized crime that has so much more power and influence. And what he says here is, what I was saying the other day about the papers. Here last week they found this couple out in California. They rent out rooms to old people and kill them and bury them in the yard and cash their social security checks. They torture them first. I don't know why. Maybe the television was broke. Now here's what the papers had to say about that. A quote from the papers said, neighbors were alerted when a man runs from the premises wearing only a dog collar. You can't make up such a thing as that. I dare you to even try. But that's what it took, you'll notice. All that hollering and digging in the yard didn't bring it. That's all right. I laughed myself when I read it. There ain't a whole lot else you can do. It's really sad what he's saying here. He's saying that neighbors don't look out for neighbors anymore. Your neighbor can be doing something insanely violent and crazy and cryptic and bizarre, and it will go unnoticed, because in our culture, we're not connected. We don't respect each other enough to connect with each other anymore, from Bell's perspective. And when that happens, people don't care about each other, and you can't count on your neighbors, and all that is worthless. So it's a very, this is an old person's perspective. If we're lucky, we all get old, and as we age, we begin to question the values of our culture. Every generation feels this way. The question is it true? Many people would say, no, it's not true. The world is better than it's ever been. And many old people would say, yes, it is true. I don't feel as safe as I used to. So I just encourage you to go back and watch those timestamps again from the film. As we always say, the second, third, fourth viewing of these passages really help us to understand the novel a little bit more. Thank you.